Lainie Liberti is an author, speaker, community leader, teen coach, and alternative education advocate who helped to spearhead the thriving world schooling movement. I would also add that she's a mentor and source of inspiration for those of us who embrace the philosophy of non-coercive, self-directed learning and unschooling. Lainie co-founded Project World School with her son Miro in 2012. They run teen retreats as month-long immersive learning communities to support self-directed teens from around the world. In 2020, Lainie founded a new organization, Transformative Mentoring for Teens, that offers virtual one-on-one coaching for teens as well as an intensive 2-week course. Lainie is an adolescent behavioral specialist, certified life coach, specializing in transformational and confidence coaching. She's also a sought-after speaker, including a popular 2016 TEDx talk in Amsterdam, and she has written extensively on the topic of world schooling, self-directed learning, and teen health for academic journals, as well as popular media outlets such as People Magazine, The Huffington Post, USA Today, The New York Times, and The New York Post. Lainie's new book is called Seen, Heard, and Understood: Parenting and Partnering with Teens for Greater Mental Health. It's a wonderful book, and I highly recommend it. Lainie Liberti, welcome to the LiberatED podcast.
Thank you for the invitation, Carrie. And also thank you for the beautiful endorsement you wrote, which is actually in the book. So I'm really grateful for you and your work as well.
Well, I was so glad to get a sneak peek of your book before it went to the press or went to press earlier in the spring, and just see what a wonderful book it is, a wonderful resource it is for parents of teens and others who work with teens. And we'll get into really what the book says, but I wanted to start with your earlier story of what I talk about in my Unschooled book. And that was kind of tracing your development of Project World School back, really beginning, the origins of which began in 2008, where you were running a company, a consulting company, marketing company in California. The financial crisis occurred, and you and your son decided to sell most of your possessions and move out of California and travel the world for what you thought was just going to be a few months, but then it turned into years. You found the experience incredibly rewarding, and with unschooling Miro, found that to be a inspiring way to learn and to see the world. And then from there created Project World School a few years later in 2012. So you've now been running, you and Miro have been running Project World School for about a decade. And I wonder, what are some of your biggest takeaways from that experience?
Oh my gosh. Well, I have learned so much about community building, conflict resolution, immersive learning, social learning, experiential learning, all of that stuff. But I've also learned that the balance of experiencing the outer worlds has to be shared with the balance of the health of the inner worlds. And that to me came as a really big surprise because independently, and since you've read my book, independently, I've done a lot of mental wellness, mental health work on myself as a self-directed, and I call it self-directed healer, self-directed learner, because that was required based on my background. But I never thought those worlds would collide. But the more that we, explore the outer worlds, the inner worlds, we're also demanding that we, put focus on that as well. Because what we realized was the experience or perception of the outer worlds was a reflection of the inner worlds. And that was powerful. Yeah.
So your sweet spot has been supporting teens,
Yeah.
really, since 2012 and since launching Project World School, and now, of course, as that work has evolved into your transformational coaching and your book and just general courses that you run for teens. So, many people are intimidated by teenagers, all right? I mean, you've talked about this too, that teenagers are often misunderstood. What is it about working with teens that you find so gratifying?
Well, from a personal experience, my teen years were really like I struggled a lot in my teen years. So every time I get to show up for a teen and see them, hear them, and really, really understand them and create safe spaces for them to do the natural exploration, I'm healing a bit of myself. So that's that, put that on the side, and that's the selfish reason. But from an overarching cultural perspective, this is the greatest time of creation, trying on different identities, exploring how we fit into the world, and really connecting with ideologies and passions. I mean, this is the greatest time in history where movements are made. Most of the people responsible for, musical changes and political changes and art, they're in adolescent. They're between the ages of, say 12 and 25. And that's powerful. There's a little more throw caution to the wind, which means that there's more comfort in stepping outside of your comfort zone and really stretching and pushing the boundaries and exploring. And that's incredible. We need this age, people that are in their adolescence, to feel empowered, because let's face it, the world needs change right now.
It's really interesting, Lainey. I mean, it's almost like looking at some of the characteristics and qualities that teenagers often display that we might find frustrating, things like risk taking or defiance of authority, or some of the things that, you would say, some people would say, well, that's what makes managing or parenting teenagers so challenging. And you kind of look at that, no, those are their strengths. That's
Yes.
what makes the teenage years so important and such a catalyst for, as you say, for change, both personal change and cultural change. What are some of those other qualities for teens that you find are so important to cultivate?
Well, I mean, you touched on them. You touched on the risk taking. You touched on basically the hyper focus of particular issues, which is attaching to ideologies. Um, they're also historically the trend makers, the trendsetters, and the trend makers of any age. Um, Unfortunately, they're also quite easily manipulated by social norms as well, and that's a whole political discussion. But in some ways, they're actually being manipulated. Um, not to step out and be independent. They're being manipulated to step out and be part of a trend that's been decided for them. And I'm not talking about one particular thing, but I think with the age of social media, this understanding that the adolescents are really those that have the power for change, they're the most easily targeted as well. And so there takes some understanding around how they function, um, what's happening in their brains in terms of the developmental changes. And as a parent, if we look at this stage of their lives, as I see it, as one of the most exciting times of their lives, it's much better to partner with them and walk side by side with them and be on the same team as them, instead of trying to dominate through authority.
Right. And so you mentioned earlier that I was thrilled to write an endorsement of your book. And I said in my endorsement, I said, as a mom of two teenagers and a longtime admirer of Lainie Liberti's work, I value her insights on prioritizing connection over coercion in our parenting approach. Seen, heard, and understood provides the tools and inspiration to build a powerful, peaceful partnership with our teens. And I really believe that. I wonder if you can talk about why you decided to write this book. What was your inspiration?
So, when 2020 shut down travel, and I'm still really active both online and in person with teens, the in person with teens was cut. And a lot of teens reached out to me because I was facilitating not only the travel experience, but the inner world experience as well. And a lot of teens reached out to me and said, I'm frustrated, or I'm anxious, or I'm in fear. What can I do? And it really struck me as a call for help. So I put together courses where I am actually giving and facilitating the tools so that when we're experiencing this dramatic change in the world around us, the ground beneath us doesn't feel steady anymore. We've got tools to sort of navigate and hold on to. And that turned into a 12-week course that I've facilitated now 6 times with 6 different cycles of teens. Sorry, that's my dog. And the feedback that I'm getting is powerful. I've been doing the classes now for a little over 2 years, and I've had about, I don't know, 5-10% come back and take the class again just so they can feel that support and practice using the tools and explore and be able to identify where they were like a year ago when they took the class and recognize the changes that they've made. So those kinds of things was really important for me. I just sort of fell into doing what I do, which is supporting the people that I absolutely care about. I totally love working with teens. I love it so much. And basically, they asked me to provide this kind of service for them. And then the reason why I wrote the book was I could only serve so many teens. I'm only one person, and I don't want to work every single day and every single moment of every single day. And I thought, I raised my son in partnership. This book is a testament to what it looks like to walk down that path with your adolescent side by side and live in partnership. And now, as a 23-year-old, raised self-directed learner, he's a testament to not only being raised with accountability for emotional intelligence, and self-inquiry was part of our family culture, but there was such an openness and vulnerability that created such a lovely connection that I can't imagine any other parent missing out on this amazing way of parenting. So this book is for them. And then, I'm really happy, but I have limited time and space to be able to work with the teens that I can.
I love how your course and to some extent the book came out of this philosophy of self-directed education, where it was the teens themselves that came to you and said, this is what we want. And then you were able to provide those resources. I mean, that's sort of, again, kind of textbook unschooling or self-directed education, where it's all driven by the individual learner. And then they use the resources around them, including the adults and mentors in their lives, to help them where it makes sense. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit, Lainie, about some of these tools that you describe in the book, as well as some of the growth that you have seen. You talked about kind of the transformational change in some of the teens that you work with. Could you give some examples of how they've applied these tools to lead to that change?
Well, sure. The foundation of the tools that I use are rooted in self-inquiry. So it's for the younger teens that I work with, it's just an introduction to going within. And my son and I started to produce classes, shorter classes that are not as intensive as the ones that I do for the older teens. But it's really about that introduction to the inner worlds. And working with 10 to 13-year-olds with my son, that for many of them, they've never even been invited to go inside. They've never even put a name to the emotions that they're feeling. Some of these teens or younger teens or tweens don't know how to define the difference between a thought and a feeling. And that, to me, that kind of practice, starting them off young and even younger would be a great idea to help create a culture of emotional intelligence. So the self-inquiry can be done at any age. Even an adult can start now if they've never even had this opportunity in their lives. But with the tools that I use, rooted in self-inquiry, They're about looking at belief systems, cultural belief systems. It's about understanding your own biology. It's about understanding the nature of psychology. The fact that we have a conscious thinking brain and an unconscious thinking brain that runs off of patterns, which are just thoughts that we think over and over that then become these rigid beliefs. And a lot of adults that have never done self inquiry walk through the planet with these belief systems that have never been questioned. For example, I talk about this in my book. One of the beliefs that I held before I started traveling with my son was, believe it or not, it was somebody else's job to educate my child because I felt like I wasn't qualified. So, like, those are the kinds of beliefs that culture gives us. And if we never take the time and use tools to pull apart, unpack, see how these belief systems have become rooted in our sort of foundation of how we walk through the planet, then there's no room for change, right? There's no room for expanding and reprogramming something that's not working, like a limiting belief like that. So working with younger teens and getting them familiar with the inner worlds, and then the older teens by providing tools so they can, here's a challenge, let's look at the evidence of the values that you're living. And we do it through a series of tools or questions. And then we distill what values are coming from that. And the realization that they are, number one, living values already, a lot of times for teens comes as a big surprise. And that tool and that empowerment, which came from within through self-inquiry, really is this thing that is absolutely empowering, and it gives them then the permission to sort of tweak using those tools. So you asked for some examples. I've worked with, like I said, 6 different cycles of teens, and my courses have anywhere between 8 and 15 teens at a time, and they run 12 weeks. And we explore not only belief systems and emotional intelligence, and there's challenges to get them to explore all of these things. We also look into passions and purpose. And a lot of times we play with the information that comes up. We use improv, we use brainstorming, we use role playing, and that becomes this playful connection to what's already inside of them and permission within these safe spaces to explore that. And I have a teen, an older teen girl who's almost 20 now, and she took the first class with me in 2020, and she's now in this cycle again. And that's the other thing, I give them open to come back at any time because it's a wonderful refresher. And when she took the first class, she was really focused on getting a license for esthetician, practicing. And she went through that. And a little bit later, almost 2 years later, she decided she hated it, but felt as if she didn't have the permission culturally to change. And we did a lot of work around that, around, whose life is this? Who are you people pleasing? We did this whole exercise around people pleasing. And what is beneath this fear of disappointing? And then she decided that she was going to move into another direction and wanted to become more entrepreneurial. But at the time, the positions that were open to her for work were waitressing. And we sort of unpacked that too, because waitressing for her was one of the most wonderful ways that she could control her income by being good at what she did every single day and get that feedback. And we started to focus on the skills that she was learning through waitressing as a way to gain these entrepreneurial skills that she'll take into her life later or whenever she wants. But it's about having people, safe spaces, mentors, peers that can help you reframe whatever the situation is instead of looking at it through a single lens of fear or judgment or cultural expectations. And that kind of support is so powerful. I've also had teens tell me story after story about using the tools in real life, maybe in conflicts with their family, and how it allowed them to not only recognize when they're in reaction mode, and decide, by pausing and focusing on re-regulating and calming their nervous system, and then responding in a way that they actually want to respond. And those kinds of behavioral changes are tools that, again, will go through, stay with these teens throughout their life. It's a skill that, oh my gosh, I wish every adult that I met and came in contact with had, right?
Lainie, I love this emphasis on personal agency,
Yeah.
fulfilling your passions and purpose, this entrepreneurial spirit that it seems comes out of your coaching and course work with these teens. I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about that, what you're seeing some of the teens able to do,
Sure.
maybe in launching their own entrepreneurial activities, or at least realizing that they are truly in charge of their own lives and their own destiny, and that they can create their own path in really meaningful ways.
Sure. So, one of the things, so with my older teens in the 12-week course, the last month we're focusing on a project. And the project came from a big brainstorming that we did for each participant in the group based on core values, issues that are important to them, their passions, and what they define in this moment as purpose and interests. So we take all of these things together and we brainstorm these really big ideas for them. And their responsibility for the last class is to present the project. So, because I come from the world of working in creative companies, and then owning my own branding agency, I understand about project management, creating schedules and milestones. And so I've created a sheet for them to, here's the purpose of the project. Here are the steps that I need to do in order to reach the end goal. Here are the dates. Here are the materials I need. Here are the dates I need to have each of these deliverables by. And I set them up with accountability partners within the course. So each person is accountable for the other person. And the projects that they produce sometimes are really wacky and fun and creative, and sometimes they're films, sometimes I've had speeches. I had one girl who did poi, and she wanted to explore how to change the color of the flame by different chemicals, and so she did all this research and all this different stuff. And I've had some amazing projects, that we've been able to experience over the last 2.5 years. But the one that I want to tell you about is from a young girl who lives in San Diego, and she is sort of, very sort of quiet and timid and very, very, very fashionable. And that is really life. Her life is focused around fashion that she modifies from thrift store purchases and music. So she's really into this music scene and how her fashion represents her music and all of that. And so for her project, she decided to find a bunch of thrift store finds, modify them by sewing patches and doing other modifications. And she is going to do a fashion pop-up in San Diego where she lives. And that sort of, she had the layout of all the steps she needed. She was able to write it out. She said that she would have never even thought of this had this not been part of the challenge and the course, and all of these things put together inspired this particular project. So I'm really proud of all the different ways people explore. And For some people, it really is in line with the entrepreneurial spirit. Others are focused on their music. I had, by the way, I had somebody make a guitar uh, a year ago. That was such a great process to watch. So the projects can be whatever, but it's the act and process and practice of doing a project that really prepares these young people for doing whatever they want to do in life.
Incredible. I was thinking, Lainey, about how you started Project World School in 2008. Now you've been working with teens for 10 years. I'm sorry, 2012, you started
Yeah,
Project World School.
but it is
2008,
10
you
years.
and Miro left to explore the world. So 10 years of really working closely with teens and supporting them and facilitating their learning. Do you think it's gotten harder for teens, right? I mean, I'm thinking about when you started Project World School, it was sort of the beginning of social media. I mean, TikTok didn't even come on the scene until, roughly 2016 and kind of gained mainstream impact after that. Is it harder now for teens to sort of manage that world? Or do you think it could create more of these opportunities, for example, for entrepreneurship and self-discovery? I'm just curious how you think teens are faring and how you've seen that evolve over the years.
I'm not sure that I would point to social media as the singular point of influencing where teens are now. I would say the big change was the restrictions due to the pandemic. And that to me was a bigger sort of bird's eye view of culturally what everybody is facing. I mean, that goes without saying. But to experience a collective trauma and not recognize that we're experiencing a collective trauma means we're trying to swim upstream without having those tools. Social media is then the content of social media is a reflection of the sort of mental wellness of the culture in that time, and I think that's reflective, absolutely, and that does influence. But since you read my book, you know that like the second chapter, I talk about what I call the COVID train, the trauma train, which is really the COVID roller coaster and the stages that we've all gone through in terms of dealing with the world looking very, very different. And especially to a teen and those that are the older teens that are, physically and biologically and socially and mentally preparing to launch in a time where the world doesn't support that. Financially it's very difficult because the economy has changed so much, and the restrictions of being able to get out and test their independence. It's just made that virtually impossible. So having the tools to unpack that, I don't have a solution for that, but what prepares people to move through all of these challenges is understanding not only how they themselves are perceiving, but what the pushback is from the world around them, and how naturally they will respond, and how they're going to choose to empower themselves so they feel like they've got the tools to help them. Can you imagine swimming upstream without tools? It's hard.
Yeah, and I mean, you do describe this in your book, and certainly the book is really a helpful resource guide for parents, especially today, who are potentially dealing with teenagers who are struggling in large part due to, as you said, COVID restrictions. I mean, we had a teen mental health crisis pre-2020 with rising rates of adolescent anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation and attempts. So this predated the societal disruption caused by the pandemic response, but certainly has been exacerbated over the past couple of years as teens were, all of us, but especially impacting teens, cut off from this larger world, cut off from their peer groups. And now, maybe dealing with the residual effects of that. And so it sounds like, as you said, you don't have the answer, but you have these tools, and it goes back to, as you mentioned, the self-inquiry, and then realizing that there are things that you as an individual can do to improve your life and to regain agency and feel like you have some control over the things around you. So, I wonder what advice you would give to parents, other than, of course, to buy and read your book. But what other advice do you have for parents, who may be accustomed to micromanaging their teenagers, or having a heavy-handed approach, more of this coercive parenting approach to child rearing in general, and especially perhaps for their teens, as their teens may be rebelling or experimenting? What advice do you have for parents?
Sure. Well, like you said, besides by my book, I have two pieces of advice. The first one is before you speak, before you act, before you interact with your teen, get into the habit of asking yourself, is this thing I'm going to say, or is this thing I'm going to do, is this going to promote connection, or is this designed to coerce? And even go a little bit deeper, because we understand coercion as, the heavy hand of power coming down at you, but there's also manipulation when it comes with a soft tone. So is there an agenda behind the thing that you're saying? Are you trying to manipulate their behavior in some way because it's most convenient for you? Right. And that generally is what it comes down to. And that takes the willingness to look at yourself. That takes the willingness to really unpack some of those belief systems that you have. And if your teen is triggering you, it's not because of your teen's behavior, it's because you've got something unresolved within yourself, and they're touching right on that wound. And I think it's the design of the universe to have kids that will do that for each one of us, because every single parent I've ever spoken to 100% has said that their teen or their child has a keen ability to push their buttons. And I just think that's, it's a beautiful dance that we can do with one another in partnership, and bring some joy into it. So that's my first tip. And the second tip really goes along with that, and it's really simple. Become a family who pauses. Pause before you interact, speak, respond. Pause. That breath helps you re-regulate your nervous system. It gives you a moment not to be in immediate reaction mode. And it really helps to create the normalcy behind responding, and responding thoughtfully and with kindness.
All such great advice, Lainie. So, as I mentioned, I have two teenagers. I'm going to see if they are interested in your courses. If a parent is listening who also has teenagers in their lives, or a grandparent who has teenagers in their lives, how can they discover your courses and figure out if it might be right?
Sure. You can find my work at Transformative Mentoring for Teens. It's kind of a long one, but it's the only one, transformativementoringforteens.com. Or you could just simply search my name. I'm all over the web. You'll find me everywhere. I do lots of interviews, and I help parents, and I speak a lot. And so you can find me there. And is it okay if I mention one project that I have right now
Please,
that's brand new?
absolutely.
So, because combined with the 10 years of facilitating retreats with teens that are based on world schooling and the experiential learning, and taking them outside of their comfort zone, and the work that I'm doing with transformative mentoring for teens, I designed a 10-day retreat here in Mexico for teens based around the hero's journey. And so we're doing 10 days of going through Joseph Campbell's structure of the hero's journey. And we're going to be using writing, art, theater, mask making, all sorts of things to write our own stories. We're going to answer the call to the adventure. We're going to go through all of the stages, designing our hero, which is really ourself, and then just defining and discovering our dragons, battling it, and then at the very end, going home to offer the gifts to the community, and that's the teen as a transformed person. So that's coming up in November, and I'm so excited. I just announced that, so I'm really, really excited about this.
And how can listeners find out more about that if slots are still open?
Yeah, at Transformative Mentoring for Teens, just click on retreat.
That's great. So the book again is Seen, Heard, and Understood, Parenting and Partnering with Teens for Greater Mental Health. It's available on Amazon in hard copy as well as an ebook on Kindle. Highly recommend it. Lainie Liberti, thank you again for being on the LiberatED podcast.
Thank you, Carrie. It's been such a pleasure. I'm so grateful.